We believe at this point we have the person responsible for the murders of Monique and Spencer Tepe in custody, and that person is Michael McKee.
You are watching new footage of a man who once saved lives, now calmly walking into a jail cell where he may spend the rest of his life. On the surface, he was everything society trusts: intelligent, disciplined, respected, a vascular surgeon, a man trained to heal. But prosecutors now allege something far darker, that behind the calm exterior was someone capable of calculated, cold violence. According to newly revealed details, investigators believe this man didn't act on impulse. They say he watched, he waited, and in the weeks before the murders, he may have been stalking his ex-wife and her husband, learning their routines, studying their home, preparing for a moment that would end two lives forever. The killings themselves were quiet, no forced entry, no chaos, just two people found dead in their own bedroom while their young children slept inside the house. Now, as he stands accused of aggravated murder, questions continue to mount. What evidence will ultimately define this case? Why did it allegedly happen when it did? And why, despite the severity of the accusations, might the death penalty not be on the table? As new video, court filings, and investigative details come into focus, one thing is clear: this is not just a story about a crime. It's a story about control, obsession, and a past that may have refused to stay buried. And the truth, still unfolding, may be more disturbing than anyone expected. The first thing that stands out is how calm he looks. In newly released footage, the accused walks through a county jail in Ohio without resistance, without visible emotion, without hesitation. His hands are cuffed. His movements are slow and controlled. He follows instructions as if this were just another routine procedure. For someone facing some of the most serious criminal charges possible, the lack of visible reaction is striking. This is the man prosecutors say orchestrated the brutal murders of a husband and wife inside their own home. A man who until recently lived a life built on precision, discipline, and trust. For years he was known as a vascular surgeon, highly trained, intelligent, and responsible for saving lives. Friends, colleagues, and patients saw a professional who appeared composed and focused, someone who did everything right. But now investigators allege that behind that composed exterior was someone capable of extreme violence. According to prosecutors, the murders did not happen in a moment of rage. They believe this was calculated, planned, quiet, and the more details that emerge, the more unsettling the contrast becomes. The crime itself was discovered on December 30th. It began when a respected dentist failed to show up for work. This alone raised alarms among his colleagues. He was known to be reliable, someone who didn't miss appointments, someone who took his responsibilities seriously. Calls went unanswered, then more calls. Friends grew worried, family members became alarmed. Eventually, someone went to the house. Inside, they found something no one was prepared for. The husband and wife were dead, shot inside their bedroom on the second floor of their home. Police later confirmed there were no signs of forced entry. No broken doors, no smashed windows. Even more disturbing, their two young children, just 4 years old and 1 year old, were inside the house at the time, physically unharmed, alive, crying. The dog was also inside, unhurt. The scene raised immediate and troubling questions. Who could enter a home without force? Who would know the layout well enough to go straight to the bedroom? And who would leave the children behind? As investigators worked the scene, they quickly realized this was not a random crime. The victims were well-liked, known as social, warm, and welcoming. Friends described their home as a gathering place, full of laughter, dinners, and celebrations. There was no known history of threats against them, no reports of recent disputes, no obvious enemies. But as detectives began examining the past, one detail stood out. The wife had been married before. Her previous marriage had ended years earlier, long before she met her second husband, long before she started a family, long before she appeared to move on with her life. On paper, that divorce looked straightforward. She filed. The separation had already been in place. The divorce was finalized quickly. No public legal battles, no drawn-out court fights. To the outside world, it looked like closure. But investigators now believe that closure may have existed only on one side. According to newly unsealed court documents, friends and people close to the victim told police that the first marriage was not what it appeared to be. They described it as emotionally abusive, controlling, filled with fear. Witnesses told detectives that the victim had shared allegations of forced intimacy and physical intimidation during that earlier relationship. Some claimed she feared for her safety even after the marriage ended. There were no police reports at the time, no restraining orders on record, just private fear, shared quietly with people she trusted. And investigators now say those concerns matter, because the man she divorced went on to build a life of his own. Medical training, prestigious positions, work across multiple states. From the outside, it looked like success. but prosecutors allege something darker was happening beneath the surface. They say the accused never truly let go. That while she moved on, remarried, had children, built a new life, he may have remained fixated on the past, and that fixation, investigators believe, may have intensified over time. As detectives traced his movements and background, they uncovered patterns that raised red flags. He had lived and worked in several states. At times he seemed difficult to locate. In one unrelated civil case, attempts to serve him legal papers reportedly failed multiple times. An address associated with him was later described as false. To investigators, these details suggested someone who knew how to disappear when necessary. Someone careful, someone calculated. Then came the surveillance footage. Video from the area near the victim's home captured a figure moving through an alley in the early morning hours, dressed in dark clothing, walking with purpose. Police say they believe that person was the accused. The footage alone doesn't show a face. It doesn't show a weapon. It doesn't show the act itself. But when paired with vehicle data, license plate evidence, and later discoveries, investigators believe it forms part of a much larger picture. And that picture, prosecutors argue, shows preparation, not chaos, not impulse. Preparation. As the investigation continued, attention turned to the weeks leading up to the murders, because according to police, this wasn't the first time the accused had been near the home. Weeks earlier, while the couple was out of town, investigators allege he was at or near their property, watching, waiting, learning. If true, it suggests something deeply disturbing, that the murders were not sudden, but the result of a long internal build-up. By the time the killings occurred, police believe the decision had already been made. And now, as the accused sits in jail, calm, quiet, expressionless, the legal system prepares to test whether the evidence supports that theory beyond a reasonable doubt. But for the families left behind, the contrast is unbearable. 2 children without parents, a home forever marked by violence, and a past relationship that may have followed someone to their death. This is only the beginning of what prosecutors say is a much larger story. As the shock of the murders settled in, investigators moved quickly to answer the most pressing question: who could have done this without leaving chaos behind? The crime scene itself offered an unsettling clue. There was no sign of forced entry, no broken locks, no shattered glass, nothing that suggested a struggle to get inside the home. To detectives, this pointed in only a few possible directions. Either the victims knew their killer, or the killer had studied the house well enough to enter quietly and confidently. That realization shifted the focus of the investigation. Rather than searching for a random intruder, detectives began retracing the lives of the victims, especially the weeks leading up to December 30th. What they found was a trail that appeared subtle at first, but deeply troubling once connected. One of the most critical pieces came from surveillance footage. Cameras in the neighborhood captured a silver SUV moving through the area near the victim's home around the time of the murders. At first, the footage seemed unremarkable, just another vehicle passing through a residential neighborhood. But investigators noticed something unusual. The vehicle appeared shortly before the estimated time of the killings, and left not long afterward. More concerning, the SUV appeared to be using different license plates at different times. At points, the plates were linked to Ohio, at other times, to Arizona. To law enforcement, this raised an immediate red flag. Swapping or using stolen license plates is a known tactic to avoid being identified by cameras. It allows a vehicle to move through neighborhoods without being easily traced back to its owner. As detectives dug deeper, they began connecting the SUV to the accused. Records tied the vehicle to locations associated with him, including his workplace in Illinois, and addresses connected to his past. Then came the cell phone data. In many criminal cases, phones are one of the strongest forms of evidence. They reveal movements, timestamps, messages, and location pings. But in this case, the phone didn't tell investigators where the suspect went. Instead, it told them what he didn't do. According to investigators, during the critical window when the murders occurred, the accused's phone showed no activity and no movement for roughly 17 hours. No calls, no texts, no app usage, no location changes. For most people, that kind of silence is rare. Detectives examined his phone usage history and found that extended inactivity was unusual. Investigators believe this silence was not accidental but intentional. Prosecutors now allege the phone may have been deliberately left behind to avoid being tracked. In other words, the absence of data may itself be evidence. But the evidence trail didn't stop there. Investigators uncovered something even more unsettling: signs that the accused may have been near the home weeks before the murders. On December 6th, the victims traveled out of town to attend a college football championship game. They were hours away from home, surrounded by friends, unaware of what police now believe was happening back in Columbus. According to newly unsealed documents, surveillance footage places the accused at or near the victim's property that same day. Police say they observed him entering the immediate area surrounding the home, what investigators refer to as the curtilage, and remaining there for hours before leaving. There is no public claim that he entered the house that day, but investigators believe this visit was significant. To them, it looked like reconnaissance, a chance to observe the property while the homeowners were away, to understand entrances, exits, lighting, cameras, and routines. Even more troubling, friends later told police that the victim left the football game early that night. She appeared upset and returned to the hotel before the game ended. According to those friends, her distress involved concerns related to her former husband. What she knew or suspected that night remains unclear. But investigators believe December the 6th of May have been a turning point, a moment when observation became intent. As detectives continued building their case, they expanded their focus to the accused's movements across state lines. He lived and worked in Illinois, roughly 7 hours from Columbus, yet evidence suggests he was able to travel without immediately drawing attention. Investigators say his work schedule did not place him on duty the night of December 6th, freeing him to travel. Then there was the vehicle itself. When police later seized the silver SUV from a hospital parking lot in Illinois, they noticed something telling. A temporary license tag that had previously been attached was gone. In its place were fresh scrape marks. Evidence. Police say that the tag had been hastily removed. To investigators, this suggested an attempt to erase evidence after the fact. Inside the accused Chicago residence, police also discovered multiple firearms. One of them, they say, shows a preliminary connection to ballistic evidence recovered at the crime scene. Ballistics testing is complex and often contested in court, but prosecutors believe this discovery further strengthens their case. Yet despite all of this, one major question remains unanswered. How did the killer enter the home? There was no forced entry. Did the victims recognize the person at their door? Was there trust? Or was the entry method something investigators have not yet revealed publicly? That answer may not come until trial. But for now, prosecutors believe the evidence paints a chilling narrative, one of planning, surveillance, and deliberate silence, a crime that didn't erupt suddenly, but unfolded quietly, step by step, long before the final shots were fired. As investigators quietly assembled their evidence, the public remained largely in the dark. For days the case felt frozen. 2 respected parents murdered in their own bedroom, no suspect named, no clear motive revealed. Then suddenly, everything changed. On January 9th, law enforcement moved in. Federal agents arrested the accused not in a dramatic chase or a midnight raid, but in a place so ordinary it felt surreal, a fast food parking lot near his place of work in Illinois. No resistance, no outburst, no attempt to flee. According to police, he was calm and compliant as he was taken into custody. That calm would become a recurring theme. Shortly after his arrest, the accused waived extradition and was transported back to Ohio to face charges. When he arrived at the county jail, cameras captured him walking through intake, hands cuffed, posture relaxed, expression unreadable. For many watching, it was unsettling. Here was a man accused of executing a husband and wife in their own home, and yet there was no visible emotion. No panic, no anger, no remorse, just quiet obedience. The charges, when announced, were severe. A grand jury indicted him on 5 counts, 4 counts of aggravated murder, 1 count of aggravated burglary. Prosecutors also included a specification alleging the use of a silencer, a detail that reinforced their theory of planning and premeditation. In Ohio, aggravated murder carries the possibility of life in prison without parole, and under certain circumstances the death penalty. Yet notably, prosecutors did not pursue a death penalty specification. This decision sparked immediate discussion. Ohio is a death penalty state. The alleged facts, execution-style killings, use of a silencer, children present in the home, could have supported such a charge. But at this stage, prosecutors appear focused on securing a conviction rather than escalating the case politically or procedurally. When the accused appeared in court for the first time, the hearing lasted barely a minute. He stood before the judge via video feed from jail. He said nothing. His attorney entered not guilty pleas on all charges and waived the formal reading of the indictment. No bond request was made, at least not yet. Once again, the accused remained silent. No statement, no visible reaction, no acknowledgement of the charges. To many observers, that silence felt strategic. Legal experts note that at this stage, speaking can only hurt a defendant. Silence preserves options. Silence limits exposure. Silence avoids contradiction. But in the court of public opinion, silence often feels like something else entirely. As the case progressed, another disturbing element came into focus: the presence of the victim's children. On the night of the murders, the couple's 2 young children, just 4 years old and 1 year old, were inside the house. They were not physically harmed. Police have not alleged that the accused interacted with them, but the reality is chilling. While their parents were killed upstairs, the children were sleeping inside the same home. When friends and co-worker eventually arrived the next morning to check on the family, emergency calls captured the sound of children crying inside. They had been alone for hours. Despite this, prosecutors have not filed additional charges related to child endangerment. Legal analysts suggest this may be intentional. Adding charges that are difficult to prove, or that distract from the core case, can sometimes weaken a prosecution rather than strengthen it. In a case already centered on 2 aggravated murder counts, focus matters. Still, for many, the absence of those charges feels emotionally jarring. As prosecutors built their case, the defense quietly began preparing theirs. At this stage, the defense strategy is not fully visible, but certain themes are already emerging. First, direct proof. While prosecutors have presented circumstantial evidence tying the accused to the scene, vehicle data, surveillance footage, weapons, and prior presence near the home, there is, so far, no publicly revealed video or eyewitness placing him inside the house at the moment of the killings. No camera showing him pulling the trigger, no confession, no forensic disclosure yet confirming fingerprints or DNA inside the bedroom. Defense attorneys often focus on that gap. They argue that suspicion is not proof, that presence near a location is not the same as committing a crime, that even strong circumstantial cases must meet the standard of beyond a reasonable doubt. Second, timeline challenges. The defense may argue that surveillance footage is misinterpreted, that the vehicle identification is flawed, or that the timing of movements does not conclusively place the accused inside the home at the precise moment of death. Third, the cell phone silence. What prosecutors frame as intentional avoidance, the defense may frame as coincidence: a phone left behind, a device powered down, a long sleep, a dead battery. To jurors, this could cut both ways. Some will see deliberate planning, others may see speculation layered onto absence. Fourth, the lack of prior police reports. Despite allegations of past abuse and threats, there were no documented police calls involving the accused and the victim in the years after their divorce. Defense attorneys may emphasize this point heavily. They may argue that allegations surfaced only after the murders, colored by hindsight and grief, and were never formally reported when the alleged abuse occurred. Prosecutors, in response, are expected to counter with expert testimony explaining why victims often do not report abuse, especially when threats are psychological rather than physical. This clash between documented evidence and lived experience may become one of the most emotional aspects of the trial. As all of this unfolds, the accused remains in jail. No interviews, no public statements, no visible reaction, just silence. And in that silence, the case continues to grow heavier, not only because of what prosecutors claim happened, but because of what remains unanswered. How was entry gained? What exactly happened inside the house? Why that night? Why then? Those answers may determine whether this case ends in a plea, or unfolds slowly, painfully, in front of a jury. As this case moves forward, one thing is already clear. No outcome will ever undo what happened inside that house. 2 lives were taken, 2 children were left without their parents, and a quiet neighborhood became the center of a case that feels both calculated and deeply personal. Now the legal process begins its slow, methodical progression. In the coming weeks and months, the case will enter one of its most critical stages, the pre-trial phase. This is where the real battle often happens. Far from cameras and headlines, defense attorneys will begin filing motions aimed at challenging the prosecution's evidence. They may attempt to suppress surveillance footage, digital location data, weapons evidence, or anything they believe was improperly obtained. Every warrant, every search, every data point will be scrutinized. How was the vehicle tracked? Were proper warrants obtained? Was any evidence collected in a way that violated constitutional rights? If even one major piece of evidence is excluded, the balance of the case could shift dramatically. At the same time, prosecutors may still be building. It is common for forensic testing, expert analysis, and enhanced video reviews to arrive months after an arrest. New witnesses can emerge, digital timelines can become clearer. What looks incomplete now may eventually form a tighter narrative. Another major question hanging over this case is whether it will ever go to trial at all. With the death penalty not currently on the table, prosecutors still hold enormous leverage. The charges carry the possibility of life in prison without parole. For the defense, that reality creates an agonizing calculation. If the evidence continues to grow stronger, a plea deal could become an option. But a plea would require admitting guilt, something many defendants refuse to do, regardless of the odds. Going to trial, however, carries extreme risk. Jurors are human, they react emotionally, and cases involving families, children, and alleged stalking often strike deep moral nerves. If this case does reach a jury, several themes are likely to dominate their deliberations. Prosecutors will emphasize planning and intent. Weeks of alleged surveillance, the use of a silencer, stolen plates, and a phone that went silent at the precise moment it mattered most. They will argue this was not impulsive but deliberate. The defense will counter with doubt. They will argue coincidence, misinterpretation, and assumption. That being near a location is not proof of murder. That silence is not evidence. That suspicion cannot replace certainty. One detail that may weigh heavily is the alleged visit weeks before the killings. Why was the accused near the home while the family was away? Why return later? For some jurors, that moment alone may feel deeply incriminating. For others, it may raise unanswered questions rather than answers. Another issue that could divide a jury is the absence of publicly revealed direct evidence. If there is no DNA, no fingerprints, no eyewitness placing the accused inside the bedroom at the moment of the murders, the defense will focus on that gap relentlessly. In criminal trials, one juror holding reasonable doubt is enough. Despite Ohio being a death penalty state, this case may never involve capital punishment. That decision could be strategic, philosophical, or both. Death penalty cases are longer, more expensive, and far more vulnerable to appeals. Some prosecutors believe life without parole delivers justice without risking procedural collapse. Whatever the reason, the absence of the death penalty does not reduce the seriousness of the charges, it simply changes the legal battlefield. Perhaps the most haunting element of this case remains the children. Too young to understand what happened, too young to testify, too young to remember everything, yet old enough to carry the consequences. They were in the house, they were unharmed, and they were left behind. No verdict can restore what they lost. No sentence can answer the questions they may one day ask. At its core, this case is not just about murder, it is about control, over a past relationship, over distance, over time, over silence. Whether a jury ultimately accepts the prosecution's version or the defense's challenge, the story unfolding here is a reminder of how unresolved history can resurface in devastating ways. As the accused waits, calm, quiet, expressionless, the weight of what happened remains heavy on everyone else. Justice, if it comes, will take time. Truth, if fully revealed, may be uncomfortable. But the silence surrounding this case will not last forever. If you want more deeply reported stories like this, stories that go beyond headlines and dig into the truth, like the video, share it with someone who cares about real justice, and subscribe for more cinematic true crime storytelling.